Welcome to the game, CEO and founder of Manshed.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to be here, man. I appreciate you coming on as well. So talk to me about Manshed, about the brotherhood that leaves no man behind.
Yeah, so look, really appreciate you inviting me to come here and to really talk about the important work that myself and the team behind Mansheds are doing.
Hmm.
Our motto is a brotherhood that leaves no man behind. Came from a realization, a very important realization, and that is that there's so many people in the world right now that are struggling, men, women, in all their different ways. Right now, if I was to ask yourself and the audience, think about how many people are committing suicide that are men in comparison to women.
Hmm.
There's 3 times more men than women. There's more men in prison than women. There are more men suffering from violence and actors of violence than women. So there's something not right in the way that men are navigating the world itself. And that's across the board, whether it's being rich or poor or different faiths or no faith, being a migrant or being indigenous, it really doesn't matter. All of these communities are struggling with what it means to be a man in the modern world. And so the work of Mansheds is really built around creating certain pathways. And there's 4 main pathways, and I'll talk more about that through this conversation. But there's 4 main pathways that we take the men on, which essentially enables us to rebuild a brotherhood that leaves no man behind. So no man is left behind in prison. No man is left behind that he's so alone that he thinks suicide is an option. No man is left behind when he's struggling with his family, or he's struggling as a father, or he's struggling as a brother, or he's struggling as a partner, leaving no man behind, because brotherhood is the way that we protect each other.
I mean, obviously, it's a very multifaceted topic, but let's start in stages. So we'll do how we kind of started first. So why is Manshed? Obviously, we know why it's important. You just mentioned it there, but
Yeah.
how did you kind of come into the fold, and why did you start this?
That's a really good question. Yeah, that's a good question. So, maybe around 15-ish years ago, I used to be a school teacher and I was running parenting workshops. And I found that the vast majority of people that were coming to these workshops were mothers. They understood the need for the school teacher and the parent to be on the same page with regards to their children. And so I just shifted the language a little bit. Instead of running parenting workshops, I ran fatherhood workshops on how a father can help their child in their learning. And that shift meant that when the men were starting to come to me and I was talking to them, that they brought up other issues that they were going on with. And so I just started to meet up with some of these men in different capacities in school. And then the friendships continued outside of school. And so we would meet up and realize that there's a lot more that's going on that often manifests in relationships, but actually occurs further down the line or deeper from their past itself. And so group of men would come together and we would journey a lot of our relationships that we're going through, some of the troubles that we're going through. And I, as a teacher, then began to run certain like one-day events, online events, and even retreats over the years around how an individual can navigate some of these relationships. And so it might be a good opportunity to really look at what Mansheds, why Mansheds. So Mansheds really has 2 meanings behind it. It's a literal place for us to come together, not in terms of an actual shed, but wherever we meet, we might meet at an outdoor center, we may meet at a cafe, we may meet at a meeting room that we've booked. So it's a place for men to come and meet each other, to rebuild a brotherhood. But also, there's a verb dimension to the word Mansheds, which is the shedding of what it means to be a man that troubles you. And typically, one of the central principles that I've developed for the programs we run is that when a man acts from his nature, he can navigate any society regardless of the changes that occurs in that society. But when a man acts to perform to the demands of whatever's around him, he will typically get hurt and then remain locked into that character even when he's outside of that environment. So what happens is when men are hurt at home, they go outside the world hurt. Or when men are hurt outside, they come into the home and they bring the hurt and they bring the fight at home. So Mansheds then is not just a place for men to come together, but it's also a place for men to return to their truth. And as a Muslim man, for me, although Mansheds is for all men, but our primary group of men are Muslim men that do come, or anyone actually who's very okay and confident around Muslim men. And they could be from any faith or any color or denomination, so long as they're okay talking about men from the Muslim community, we welcome you. But if any man has a problem with Muslim men, it's like,
Yeah.
I don't really want you here.
Yeah.
Do you see? So
Yeah,
it's like,
'cause
if
you-
you've done the work
yeah,
and you're not racist and you're not
yeah,
Islamophobic, Bismillah, come. But if you've not done the work, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah. They're not receptive to you. So what's the
Exactly.
point? Yeah.
Exactly.
So going back to when you were in the school, so where did the epiphany come to say, look, like the women are coming, so the mothers are coming, but the fathers are not. So let me focus on the fathers
Yeah.
rather than just let me just carry on do my job. You know what I mean? Like, why the extra? And where, number one, where's the epiphany come from? And then number
Yeah.
two, why act on it?
Nobody's really asked me that question before.
Yeah.
And I'm smiling because it was very personal to me. So my first son is from a marriage that didn't last.
Okay.
And so at the time, I was navigating being a dad to him, as well as having children from my second marriage. And the realization at the time was that if only I had someone that could talk to me and help me navigate some of the challenges around reconnecting with him.
Okay.
Because I had him very young. I was 18 when I had my son.
Okay.
And so it was how do I really know what it means to be a father? And so it was just that understanding that maybe others are going through the same thing. So I was just trying to put myself into that picture that if I've got a child in school, again, I think most fathers, most mothers want their children to do their very best. But sometimes life just gets in the way.
Yeah.
And when life gets in the way, you want someone to come and not just say, you're doing this wrong and you're doing that wrong. You actually want them to come along and say, look, here's a pathway, here's some support, and let's do it together in a way that's sustainable for you and your community. So yeah, that was the driver, was that, okay, if I was in that position, I'd want to to do
and
that.
plus, obviously, at that time in your life, you felt like you needed help yourself, so you
100%.
kind of fit it together, kind of mashed.
Yeah, I attended a training program, which one of the big takeaways from this training program, as a teacher, I was also a teacher trainer. So in my role, I was also developing, teachers, mentoring them. And one of the realizations after this course that I came to was that the best way to learn is to teach. And so I wanted to learn how to be a good father. And in wanting to learn how to be a good father, I realized I can't be a good father if I'm not a good individual. And in realizing I can't be a good individual until I am a good servant of God. And that journey, really, that personal dimension to the Manshed's journey is that. And it's probably taken me 10, 15 years to arrive at, okay, this is what's happened. And so literally as we speak, we're doing a huge revamp, myself and the team behind Mansheds, of the programs that we're running, and being a lot more intentional about who we're talking to, how we are talking to them, what we're saying to them, what they're going to go away with and work with, and what changes we want them to make, and equally who we're not talking to. Because there was this thing of, any man is allowed to come here, and that's still true. But if I say this is for any man and every man, then no man will really understand it until they talk to me directly. But if I'm making it very clear, this is for the brown and black man, the Muslim man also, and anyone who's comfortable in these spaces with these men, then the journey is very clear. So if you've got any other ideas about community and men that trouble you around, the faith of men, or around the color of men, or around the social class of men, then you're not welcome here.
And where did that realization come? Because obviously, I don't know, to me it seems obvious to have that that breakdown from in the beginning, to say, look, like, these are what the characteristics sit with us. So if you're not willing to come in here, because it's like one bad apple spoils the broth. So it's kind of like, how come you never really navigated that, and where was the learning process like? So where did you kind of realize that, look, we have to change and do it this way?
I think initially the intention initially was that
to help.
How do I teach men the ideas around manhood that trouble them, and help them to identify who they actually are, if in the beginning I'm only talking to the Muslim man? I will not, because during the many events that I've run, we've had men from all spectra, men from Australia, men from South Africa, men from America, men from different parts of the world, heterosexual men, homosexual men, Christian men, atheist men, Buddhist men, Hindu men, Sikh men, all come through the doors of Mansheds. that enable me to understand, okay, there is something actually of substance here. And this substance now needs to be channeled. And the turning point was when I repeatedly heard from the men who would turn up saying, I didn't realize this was what I was going to get.
Okay.
You know, I didn't realize how enriching the experience was going to be. And so what I understood then is that the language I was using was very open, which meant that if a man was already on the journey, I will catch him late. The language now catches the man a lot earlier in his journey.
Okay.
So for example, our fatherhood program that we're running, which is one of the programs, is a program that's designed to help men who want to be the central male role model in their children's lives.
Okay.
And that doesn't matter whether you were absent in your child's life. It doesn't matter if you're a stepfather. It doesn't matter if you're a new father or an old father. This particular program, and it's a year-long program, which involves retreats, which involves one-day workshops, which also involves going out in nature, which also involves group coaching. So it's a one-year program that we take the men through, which essentially gives them a toolkit to understand the various stages of a child's upbringing up until they're an adult and beyond. Because my eldest son is 24 years old.
Okay.
So I've understood the journey and made many, many mistakes.
Yeah.
And along the way, I've realized, and if you speak to my children, honestly, you know, there was a return in many ways to the universal messages within Islam. You know, there are some messages that we can understand as Muslims, but there are some messages that if you say them, everybody gets it. And, you know, one of them is, for me, the big one was around the best of you are the best to their families, you know. And so I thought, well, that doesn't exclude men, that includes men. So if I just shaped that and said, you need to be the best to your family first before you're trying to change anything else in the world. And that's what I did. And through a lot of changes and a lot of very difficult conversations, I've come to a very, alhamdulillah, with God's grace and God's protection, a point where I'm in love with my children and my children are in love with me. And we're still journeying, you know, there's still huge amounts to grow. But we're on a journey, and we have experienced the depths of each other's hearts and souls and minds, and that's the kind of teaching from which I then extract one layer, coupled with huge amount of research, because I love learning and reading, you know, to then teach the men that if you're a new father, have you really thought through, am I a person who's strong enough to be able to understand the social messaging around what it means to be a man or what it means to be a father, and my natural archetypal, you know, reality, that which God designed for me. How
So
can
your
I
own
express?
personality.
It's beyond the self. It's the dimension of everyone's existence that's true, because we know that God created us, and then after that, each of us expressed the individuality that we all have. But there is a centrality to who we are, you know, which from an Islamic faith, the beginning of the consciousness of man was the Adamic consciousness, the consciousness of Adam, Prophet Adam, that then followed after that. And so I do teach the men how to access Quranic stories, biblical stories, from a point of view of living them today. So what does it mean that Adam was the first and Eve was the second, or Hawa was the second? What does that mean to you today? How do you truly embody that?
So talk to me about the 4-step program.
Yeah, so there's really 5 programs.
5 programs.
Yeah, but it's, to understand the 5th one, I have to explain the 4.
Yeah. So we'll go chronologically.
Yeah, so the 4 programs: manhood, brotherhood, fatherhood, and the hood. Okay. So manhood is a program that teaches men to in fact, all 4 programs teaches men to navigate life through the 4 different types of people that we meet. Okay, so the first type of person you meet is actually yourself. And so the manhood program centralizes upon the concept, the belief, although it's not a religious organization, we are a spiritual organization. And for me, the language I understand is Tawheed. And what is Tawheed? Tawheed is the submission to Allah and Allah alone. And so the manhood program is about how do you contextualize, how do you define your manhood upon your relationship with Allah, which is how do you understand your relationship with Allah first.
Okay.
And then the second program, the brotherhood program, is...
Wait, actually, before you move on, so when you say how do you understand yourself to Allah,
yeah,
what do you mean by that? So for people, because I get what you mean, but for people that may not have the same brain or the same kind of like, they don't catch the wavelength.
Yeah,
you can simply explain it then.
Yeah, okay. So the concept of self has passes through many dinner tables and coffee tables and podcast tables, and we all trying to understand the answer to the question, who am I?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest lie that's been told out there. This concept of being self-made, this concept of being a self-developed or self-help and all of this, it's all about creating the self. But the Islamic principle or the principle of oneness of Allah is that Allah created you. So you must understand you're meeting who you are when you let go of trying to be who you should be.
Okay.
So it's actually, who am I when I surrender to my presence within which I can get close to Allah.
Okay.
So it's giving men an understanding of the different dimensions within themselves, teaching them essentially that your sovereignty, your sense of submission is only to Allah. Now, if a man walks away from our program, and this is the intention, for men to walk away from our program knowing, I only submit to Allah.
Yeah.
Allah is the only one I bow down to. What does that now mean in how he sees you?
Yeah.
Two things happen. Number one, his engagement with you would mean that he never wants to disempower you because he also knows your submission is to Allah and Allah alone. The second thing then is also, he doesn't submit to you, no matter what your position and authority and wealth and fame and status is. He will only really talk to you as someone who is a fellow traveler on the journey back to Allah.
Okay.
And so this, we take men through a series of immersive exercises to get them to understand your surrender is to Allah alone. And in realizing that, what then happens is you begin to return to your true self. And that true self, then, we invite the men to understand what are your values, what are the morals within which you navigate life, and how can you live your life in such a way that your values manifest in every part of your life, as opposed to thinking, and I typically get this, and this is the biggest slap that the men who come on my retreats get, which is when they come to me with a problem, one of the first things I realize is that I'm actually dealing with a liar here.
Okay.
And that person's lying to themselves. So I expose their lies and I say, you're telling yourself that you believe this, but you're doing something else. Let me first tell you, we don't do that. You only do what you believe. Unless you've got a gun to your head. Do you have a gun to your head when you did this? No, I didn't. And then it's like, so firstly, let's first articulate and express that you are a person that did this and you intended to do this. Now then, once you accept that, we can then unravel back to see, when did you first learn it? When did you first experience it? When did you use it as currency to navigate life? And how can we hold accountability, not judgment? Because the kind of things that men have told me over the years, you'd be shocked with and that's because we create an environment that allows the men to turn up as they are. So one of the principles is called kaya. It means come as you are. And we very much live by that. It doesn't matter where you're at on the spectrum of anything. So you've got men who are living as Muslims, but they're no longer Muslim. Men who are navigating challenging, relationship dynamics, and you can, figure out what that means. And we accept them as they are. And we then simply say, you want to do this work? Let's get you to being honest first. And face who you are, pretending to be, to let go of that, to be who should submit to Allah and Allah. And that's the manhood program.
And so it's basically a mirror of have you heard of the poem, Man in the Mirror?
No.
No.
Isn't that Michael Jackson?
No. Well, you know what? Let me get it, because the first time I'll ever do this, but I don't want to get it wrong. So, 1 second. So, just before I get this up, I got another question. So, when you've kind of So yeah, he's a Michael Jackson song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But there's a poem as well
Yeah.
by Barry Jablonski.
Okay.
Okay. So mirror, mirror on the wall, you knock me down, but I still crawl. I gaze into empty light, dark is day and day is night. The man in the mirror wants me dead. He will not rest till blood is shed. But I fight against him with all I possess. You take control so I can repress. Fueled by anger and empty thoughts, the man continues his onslaught. He shows me I am worthless and there is no hope. I'll fight him, still continue to cope. This has become my daily war. Today I have won the battle. Tomorrow is anyone's guess as I fight with the man in the mirror. So that's by Dougie Fresh. Have you heard about that poem at all? Or?
No, first time.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
So I feel like that kind of epitomizes what you're talking about in terms of like, so when you're saying men lie, or well, not even just men, like across the board, it's because it's comfortability. So we're comfortable with the thoughts that we're like this, even though we might not actually be. So it's mirroring. So what you're trying to say, in my opinion, is mirroring your actions to what you actually are, rather than what you think you are.
Yeah. Or what you have convinced yourself that you're becoming.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I also discover, and I do talk to men from various groups, and we're just, and I'll talk about one of the programs, which is actually for boys 13 to 17. So
we'll get onto that.
But one of the things that I've lost my trail of thought actually. Ask that question again.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, so just to kind of simplify it is, so when we're talking about that poem, Man in the Mirror, Man in the Mirror. So you know when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you look at is a mirror.
Yeah.
Obviously, you look at your bedroom, but when you go to the toilet, you look at the mirror and you wash your face. But the one you see in the mirror is who you truly are.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people do is they'll wash their face and then they'll go on to something else, or they'll jump on the phone or because they know that whatever they thought of themselves when they're younger is, so I'm talking as an adult, not when you're a young kid, but as an adult, is if they're not anywhere near what they thought they would be, or the potential they had, or they thought they had, they won't look at the mirror. They kind of like wash their face and get occupied by different things and delay, and then throw all the heartache, all that pain to the back of their mind.
And what you're describing there manifests differently with young people and younger men and older men. With older men, what I'm finding is those in their 40s, there's a plethora of men that have suddenly experienced huge bouts of anxiety. And that's because as they get older, what they realize is the path that they thought they were going to be on, or the destination that they thought they should have reached by now, or the milestones, that they're so far from it that they're coming to the end of their life and they think
it's over.
It's all over. And the realization there is huge. And for younger men, when they experience anxiety, it's a different journey. So the 4 programs that we run, the first program fundamentally enables men to stop the act of performing and understand the difference between wearing armor and wearing a mask. A mask deceives. An armor tells you, listen, I've got my sword in my hand. And if you come for me, it's going to come out. But if you don't come for me, it's going to stay in the sheath. That's the difference. And that's the teaching that we give the men is stop acting from your mask. Don't pretend that, I'm okay. If somebody hurts you and you stop pretending you're okay, the next time he's going to carry on hurting you. And you will be none the wiser. And then the mask you have, because it's quite fragile, because the mask is a lie. Whereas armor will protect you for a while. And it will make you realize, I need to step away, or I need to strike back, or whatever you need to do in those ways.
You might express this in the other 4 projects or programs. Let me just say something there. So when you say in terms of armor and the mask, so I think it's a bit of both. So as a man, you'll always have a mask, or as a woman, like just generally speaking, you'll always have a mask. Like
what do you mean by mask?
So when I say mask, I mean, so when I'm talking to you now, you don't, this is the first time we've really talked. We met at an event before, but first time we've seen each other really, first conversation, but you don't truly know who I am, and I don't truly know who you are. That will all come over time. The more we talk, the more we speak, and the more we know each other. But the first initial thought of me and thought of you is our mask, is what you present to other people.
No. So, okay, so I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Maybe I got the wrong end of the stick.
No. What you're saying is right, but let me tell you how I define mask and how I define armor. You're absolutely right. Mask, to me, means you're portraying an image of yourself that's not you.
Okay.
Whereas when you only give parts of you, that's the armor. But
Okay,
the
okay,
difference
yeah, yeah.
between armor and mask is this. The parts you hide, which are underneath your armor, are not parts that contradict the parts that you show. Whereas the mask hides parts that contradict the parts you show. And that's the difference. And hence,
But fundamentally, isn't the answer to that honesty?
yeah.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised in a world that rewards materialism, that rewards performance, that is hierarchical based on social value. It's easy to perform.
No,
Take a
it's-
picture,
yeah.
clicks,
Yeah.
social media
No,
validation.
100%.
People are addicted to the pleasure
But don't
drug.
you think that, so forget the materialistic objects or whatever, like I'm wearing a watch now, you're wearing a watch, but forget all that, like, I mean in terms of intrinsically, so who we are. So as you grow up, obviously your environment defines you to an extent. That's always the case. It doesn't matter if it's before social media or before what's going on today. If it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, people are the same. So like, let's say if you were living in a village in Pakistan, for example, where I'm from, I know for a fact my great-grandfather had no phone, no materialistic object, nothing. All he had was a horse. But when he met people, he'd act like he's the king. Just because of his personality, like what he's about. And he's just a farmer, but the way he portrays himself and the clothes he'd wear, he'd make himself look like a king. That's his own personal personality.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is intrinsically, that's how he is.
In response to what you're saying, the thing about armor is this. When a man understands when to not wear a mask, but instead to understand when to wear his armor, he also, in tandem, understands when to take his armor off. Yeah. And that's the thing that men don't get, is that when you're in the outside world, the way you are interacting with people means at times you cannot and should not show all parts of you, because a man's vulnerability, I treat and teach men, your vulnerability is a gift. It's an act of love. It's sacred. It's actually your journey back to Allah. Because when we're feeling weak, who do we turn to? Allah. And if we're struggling, who do we turn to? People of Allah. And if you love people as the people of Allah, what then happens is you submit to Allah. And so your vulnerability is sacred. Don't give it everywhere. This nonsense that men should talk, I absolutely disagree with it. People should listen. And what I teach men first is, how do you listen before you talk? And that's the thing that's missing. The reason why men aren't talking about their issues isn't because they're not good at talking. They're very good at talking. The reality is men have done huge successes to the world. There's been some horrors, but it's not because they're a man. It's because those were individuals who were just poisonous to the world. But men do know how to talk, but there are certain parts of men that society doesn't listen to. And so what I teach the men first is learn how to listen, because the best communication tool is the tool of listening. And so the 4 programs that we do, the first one is manhood. And that fundamentally is about the man's relationship with himself and Allah, himself and God, himself and the eternal, himself and the Most High. Whatever names you want to give to God, it's the relationship a individual, in this case a man, has with himself. And so we teach men tools on how to be at peace with themselves, no matter what turbulence is happening around them. How do you return to your submission to Allah to say, God's got me? You know that when you submit to Allah, we know from an Islamic perspective, when you ask God of anything, ask as though it is going to be accepted. Not the exact result you want, but God will do for you what's right for the question you're asking. And so it's understanding that when you turn to God, understand that no matter who's against you, even if the sea is in front of you ready to be parted, you, like the Prophet Moses, strike your staff and allow God to take the rest. And so that sometimes that cry to God is the place that you strike your staff and you say, Allah, I will do my bit. And then to the world, you say, God's got me. It's when you enter into the world with that with that mindset. So the second program is the Brotherhood program. And this is where we teach men a toolkit. All of these toolkits I've developed myself. And it's the toolkit around the relationship as a separate entity to you and the person you're in a relationship with. And what we teach men is the values of your relationships should be consistent, but some are more intense than others.
Is this relationships as a whole?
As a whole, platonic and romantic.
Okay, yeah.
So it could be relationships with your siblings,
your father.
relationships with your parents, your children, your spouse, a potential spouse, and everyone and anyone in between. To understand the various ways and why and how do we navigate those relationships from, remember, the central place is your relationship with God, and then you realize when I have a relationship with someone else, I'm actually not just having a relationship with them, I'm having a relationship with them and Allah. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Or even if a person doesn't believe in God, I'm having a relationship with them and Allah and their belief not in Allah.
Yeah.
So it's understanding that how do you fall in love with the world? It's by bringing Allah into the world. Not through dogma, not through doctrine, not through religious edicts, not by telling people you've got to pray like this, you've got to have your beard like this, you've got to have your clothes like this. But it's through your character. When people see that this is an individual who lives and believes in his character, what you find then is that people, when you tell them that you love them, they'll believe it. And when you tell them that you love them, they'll know that you don't want anything in return. And so the performative man is the man that when he loves, he wants something back. He sees love as a currency. I loved you, you do this for me. And so as a father, when you love your children in that way, it's problematic. Because a father should never expect anything back from his children, but he should raise them to understand what Allah has ordained so that they fulfill their role, as opposed to do it for me because I'm your dad. No, do it for me because this is actually natural to you. For us to connect with our parents is natural to us. But unfortunately, of course, there are times when you have either toxic children or you have toxic parents and you have to learn to navigate that. And that's something we also teach. So that's the second program. The third program is fatherhood. I briefly touched upon that previously. It's a toolkit that I've developed which takes the father through understanding the various stages of parenting, and that from how do you first receive your child as a baby to how do you then begin to develop a relationship with your child, to how do you then nurture your child, the phase of nurture, to then the phase of all the aspects that come in of how do you then correct your child? How do you bring your child back should the influences of the world overwhelm them? But it's based on the notion that if, for example, a parent is always correcting their child may well be very well astray. But that's actually not the way to correct your child. There's a lot of other work that's got to be done. So I get men to understand you cannot correct a child that you've not taught. You cannot teach a child that does not love you. So how do you first develop the love and have the patience? And this takes a lot of work. Because when your child is messing around and in that moment you choose not to correct them, but you choose to love them, you're laying the foundation for them to then listen to you, which lays the foundation for you to then teach them, which then lays the foundation for you to remind them and say, oh, this is what you agreed. Come on, sort yourself out. As opposed to, and that's where we teach the way of being strategic with your emotions. So you don't release all of your emotions at once. It's like you're frightened, your child is lost. It's like, okay, what can I do? I can either spread all of my emotions everywhere, or I can be strategic and like even a cup of water drips onto a stone, eventually it will cut through that stone. So it's that kind of approach. It's getting men to realize that if you don't know how to navigate your emotions, you're going to find yourself essentially just bleeding everywhere. And everyone's like, what happened to him? So that's the third program, fatherhood. And then the fourth program is called The Hood. And that involves us taking men to understand their role in the world from a point of view of the orphan. And so this program, we take men to Syrian, Palestinian refugee camps. This year we're taking 10 men, and they will deliver aid, and then we'll deliver a program with them where we get them to understand the prophetic idea of masculinity. What was the message of the Prophet, the man, peace be upon him, who essentially lived to protect the most vulnerable. Now, if you think about the thought pattern of the Prophet, who thought of everyone, including the most vulnerable, to the typical man who's struggling in life, He's thinking about his job. He's
Yeah,
thinking about X, Y, and Z. And that's not negating in any shape or form what's going on, but it's saying you can become so fixated on your personal problems, and rightfully so at times. But what actually is required here is to stop only thinking about your problems, to open yourself up so others can come around and say, how do we help each other? One of us is struggling right now. Let's come and help each other. As opposed to one person is struggling in his own way too. And it's realizing, you speak to many fathers, your own father, and ask him about his journey of being a father. How many other fathers did you go to? You're lucky if you had a grandfather that was active in your life, because many of us had grandfathers that were either in other countries or grandfathers were too busy and we didn't really have that relationship. And so learning how to be a father is one of the lies of the world. You actually have fatherhood inside of you. That comes out. And so the environment can influence you, but when the environment is right, then the natural way
100%.
comes out.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was trying to get at, because it's intention. You have to be intentional in what you do, because actually, before we go on to this topic, how do you deal with people that haven't got any critical thinking? So when you're talking there, you're talking from a strategist or a person with a philosophical mind that kind of creates other people who have the same kind of framework of thinking. But if you're talking to someone that doesn't have really that, because some people don't have it. So like, I know people where they're thinking the here and now. They don't really look at any variable factors or the outside world or anything like that. So how do you kind of, when those people need help, have you had any cases where you access those kind of people and kind of bridge that gap between critical thinking and just living every day as it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. So firstly, I don't speak to people that don't want to listen.
Okay.
So that's my rule.
Yeah.
And
fair enough.
So if you don't want to listen,
100%.
And it's very quick to find out, has this person just come to talk and blurt out their projections? Or have they actually come to be involved in a healthy conversation? And so I don't talk to people that don't listen. Second thing is understand that when a person is fixated on the here and now, usually it's either an identification issue, or it's a trauma issue. So they are in survival mode, because for us to be forward thinking, for us to be planners is a very masculine trait. And so when an individual can think years ahead and think, what am I doing now that can impact me? Even in the words of the Prophet, if you've got a seed in your hand, plant it like the day of judgment is something going thousands of years ahead. I'm paraphrasing here. But at the same time, live as though you might die today. So it's like it's a careful balance of two. So live in such a way that you focus on the now, but think in such a way that what you're doing now is going to impact your future. So when I talk to my boys, when I talk to my sons, I say to them, like the other day I was cooking, and I was saying to my son who was cooking with me that one day your daughter or your son, he hasn't got a daughter or a son, right? Your daughter or son is going to, inshallah, be cooking with you, and she's going to ask you, Dad, who did you learn cooking from? And you're going to say, I learned it from my pops. And it was like planting seeds of hope, of realizing, and you're getting them to think ahead. So with someone who's really fixated, it's meeting them where they're at. There's no point me talking to somebody about the future if they're here right now. So it's getting to them and listening to them. And one of the best tools to help a person feel heard is to simply say, to breathe and say, look, this is what I've heard you say. Is that right? And you'd find that we become so locked into our own thought patterns. And we just talk to ourselves and we carry a thought, and maybe somebody else intervenes from childhood or schooling or something that we've experienced through media or TV or whatever it might be, and you carry that thought for years and you think it's your thought. And unfortunately, most people are actually remembering. They're not really living, because to live is to be here right now. To remember is to interpret what's going on from the point of view of what's happened before, and that then projects onto the fear and anxiety of what's about to come. And so it's getting to them on their level. And what I normally find is that it takes a while, but if you can just mirror to them and say, this is what I'm hearing you say, and help them to see what the next step is, or help them to, once you've given them a synergy in where they're at, you can then say, well, what are your options? And that's when you get them to think beyond, because you can't get a person to change their thinking until you think like them. And that means you have to let go of trying to be right.
Mm.
But to listen is one of the most beautiful acts of love. And unfortunately, we're living in a world which is look at me,
Yeah.
everybody listen to me, rather than let me listen to others and understand who they are.
How do you think that's changed?
In society,
Yeah.
I think we've become a society that has always gradually been going towards the concept of self. The concept of family now is seen as just mom, dad, and children,
Yeah.
whereas the concept of family before was really the people you love. It was your community, it was your neighbor, it was your uncle, your aunt, and all of these people were the people that you called family. And so hence why even the tradition, people would all have the same surnames, even though they didn't have the same grandparents, because it's like the Khan family, or the Awan family,
Yeah.
or the Faraz family. So these were the different names that were given to people to symbolize the family. And families are a place that you show love. And of course, then, I think a lot of things happen, breakdown possibly.
But don't you think, see, I've got a theory where I think it's drifted apart because of education. So if
Okay,
you look
explain
at
more.
it, so if I explain it, like obviously people might get shocked by this, but if you think about it, so 100, 200 years ago, you'd have, like you're saying, it's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So we look at it, so before Birmingham itself, like where we're living today, it weren't 1 million people. It was about maximum 30,000 people if you look 200 years ago. And obviously they were predominantly white people that were living in different villages. So it was
Yeah.
kind of like lots of small little villages that kind of made up the city.
Yeah.
But no one really lived in the city. Most people lived outside because there was a lot of disease and famine in the city.
Yeah.
So they kind of lived outside of it. So
Yeah.
the city wasn't really a city. You just kind of like loads of different sections.
Yeah.
So when you have loads of different sections, everyone's kind of separated. So
Sounds a bit like Game of Thrones.
yeah, that kind of thing. So like that's what it was like.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, like in those ecosystems, everyone had the head of the ecosystem. So
Yeah.
the head chief or whatever his name was, he was that head of that. And then the people under him, because he had education from his dad, who was the king before him, or like he was the city holder, whatever they want to call it, they listened to him. Because they had no other education or there was no other understanding. So they thought, follow him because he's telling me this and then I'll get food, I'll get water, I'll survive. Because they haven't seen, there's no comparison, they haven't seen no one else do more or do less. They're thinking, this is it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is all I got. So I'll just do this. Like it's kind of robotic. So they kind of just carried on with that. But then as education come and education spread and the world got more populated and more people interconnected, then when we got... and the Industrial Revolution, where Pakistanis kind of come over, and Kashmiris and people from different countries, the Caribbeans, for example, in 1950s, 1930s, when they come over, there's a new education process. And what comes first? When change happens, people get resistant. So people, the main occupiers started resisting the change, but slowly but surely they kind of got used to each other. Then more education spread, more conversations. The schools became more readily available. Like only 120 years ago, schools were only for the rich.
Yeah.
Now it's for everyone.
Yeah.
So now because everyone's got education, now it's like, oh, now I can be a businessman. I can be this. I can be that. So now everyone's thinking, look, if I can do it and you can do it, now it's a competition. Because before, I'm just following the one guy because he knows everything. But now, because I know it and you know it, it's like, what separates us now? Or what makes us part of something? So then what you're saying, the Han family, the Dawes family, whatever it is, kind of comes into their own, and each person trying to become the main guy because there's nothing to differentiate. Before we were wearing the same clothes, but now I'm wearing this colour, you're wearing that colour. Let me see if I think this colour's better.
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
that all kind of happens. But it comes to education. So what
I think, yeah. So I think it's interesting what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that there are some threads of expressions that I can relate to.
Okay.
But I want to weave out some of the stuff that doesn't sit well with me. For example, this notion that education was the cause behind people saying, well, I can also be a businessman or something.
Yeah.
That
So
is correct.
Okay, go on.
But I don't think that's really what's being expressed here. What's really being expressed, and again, there's things that we say and there's things that we mean. When a person says, I want to be that, typically, in the scenario that you painted, what they're really saying is, what my community are doing isn't good enough. So my dad's a taxi driver, not good enough. My dad owns a pizza shop, not good enough. My dad works in a factory, not good enough. My dad's an accountant, not good enough. And it doesn't stop there. Your dad could be a director of a company, not good enough. I want to be the owner of my own company. That comes from economic policies and social policies that impact when a household can no longer, as we know, function on just typically the average, income for one person.
Yeah.
And so now what has happened is people have grown in ambition, but it's really built on monetary gain, not communal value.
Okay.
Because what happened before is when communities lived together, the communities, when there was a problem, would come together.
Yeah.
They would borrow from each other. And where were you going to go?
Yeah.
You're there.
Yeah.
If you borrowed something from someone else, you give it back. Because if it's not like, there's old tales that my granddad and grandma would tell me how, 20 years later, even after the person's passed away, the daughter would come and say, your mom borrowed this from me. I want it back.
Yeah.
What's happened now is that with all of that gone, the infrastructure that kept families together is now solely sitting onto the shoulders of the dad and then the mom. And so now both parents are working. So whilst both are working, who's raising the kids? The school is.
Yeah.
So now the school is an environment which is absolutely alien to the human nature.
Okay.
And what I mean by this is this: there's no other world or part of the world that I can think of, and I'm happy to be wrong, but even if I am wrong, it's the exception and never the rule, where people interact solely based on age. How old are you?
22.
22, right? I'm 42, 20 years older than you.
Yeah.
And we're having a wonderful conversation. But what if you were only allowed to do a podcast with 22-year-olds? The quality of your podcast would drop drastically, right? But it's because the flavor of age and the flavor of experience gets interwoven into these conversations, hence why this is a successful podcast.
Yeah.
Hence why that does. But schooling, if you're 11, you're with an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what ability you have. I mean, it makes more sense, put all the kids in ability groups, teach them a subject and say, right, I don't really care about age. Because if we care about learning, then age doesn't matter when you start. We all hear these wonderful Instagram videos where they say, oh, a woman who's 60 or a man who's 70 went back to uni. But what if he did that with an 11-year-old kid? Those kids, the school environment would ridicule him. So the school environment is the problem.
But before, let me just cut you off there. So when you're on about, so what you just said there, the parents, the father go to work or whatever, and the kids, it's up to the school. That's what
it shouldn't be the case.
No, it shouldn't be the case, but that's what the case is.
Yeah.
But so let me just make my point clear before maybe we were saying the same thing, I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is, so for example, if you look at my DNA and my lineage, and I'm very grateful to actually know this because a lot of people don't know, but I know for a fact that it was my granddad's uncle that kind of forced himself with his ambition to get to England. So he basically his uncles got to England and they came to work and go back home. And he wanted to be a part of that. But he was only 12, 13, 14 at the time. And he didn't want to be farming. It wasn't enough for him. He wanted to do something else. And he thought UK is a possibility. I got to get there and do something for my own family. So by his own hustle, by selling teas, doing everything, wheeling and dealing, he got himself to Karachi, which is the south of Pakistan. So from the north to the south. And then when he got to the south, he met an army official. And that army official, as he got to know him, so he's playing the game the whole time. And as he got to know him, he goes, look, I'll get you on the next flight. He goes, how old are you? He's about 15. But he's obviously taller than me, and he goes, I'm 18. He goes, yeah, come on the flight. So he took his younger brother, my granddad, and then they come to England, and they're both 14, 15 at the time. But they just hustled, and then they worked hard, and then they built their institution here. So they worked so hard that the UK government, like with many Pakistanis, said to them, look, why are you going back to Pakistan? We want you to work here and stay here. So basically they'll work for 6 months, and then 6 months they go to Pakistan and come back. And they're saying, look, work here all year round, like you're doing good work. So then they go, okay then, and then they go, look, we'll pay you, right? So they brought his wife along, made a living here. That's when my dad was born, and then my dad made a living. But through that progress, through that journey, there's a progress. So my granddad's older brother, he made a progress from farming to getting to England. And then my granddad made the progress of going to England and building an institution, which he obviously brought my dad up, and my dad took it further. So from not being a worker in a factory like his brothers, he made his own businesses and his own charities and done other work. So that bridged the gap further, and he put us, that's that progress again. So when I'm doing something now, I'm doing progress, but for the journey, for the kids ahead or the next generation, Now there's progress for the sake of progress. Unless you're doing real revolutionary stuff, it's all kind of the same thing. The revolutionary ones are your generation, the ones that are 40 to 60 that have actually done stuff. Do you see where I'm coming from? Because
Yeah.
they're the first that have done it. But
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
if I just do, let's say if I took, I don't know, like you're saying, I became a business owner, or like you said, monetary gain, that's the only way I can differentiate myself from my father.
Yeah.
So alhamdulillah, my father done something. For me to push it further, it just put an extra zero at the end of it, or more people have been engaged, or I've
Yeah,
helped more people.
that's the cheap way.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
No, but so what I'm saying is, if that's the cycle, so when I'm saying you're saying schooling, I think schooling comes from the fact that is the lower the progress, like we just have to, the progress that can be attained by most people is adding 100 people extra, or adding £100, or adding something monetarily wise to the end of the digit line, because there's no other way to basically another easier way to differentiate between what your father did or the last generation before you to what you did, because everyone
Yeah.
wants to grow, but now the growing sake of it is just to monetary gain.
yeah, I mean, I think
Did you
there's-
get where I'm coming from?
what I'm hearing from yourself is that there was an intention from your elder who came to progress, and
Yeah.
I'm interested in knowing how you define progress in the context that you shared it. But
Yeah, yeah.
progress was made for that led him to have an ambition to come over here,
Yeah, yeah.
to set up certain organizations and companies or etc.
Yeah, yeah.
to really change the lifestyle of his legacy,
Yeah, yeah.
essentially. His progeny,
Yeah,
his children and his children's
imprint
children,
on the world.
right?
Yeah.
And of course, then now the shift, the needle of shift is not as variable.
Yeah.
Whereas the shift from one generation, like maybe 2 months before your great uncle, your grandfather, that, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact individual, but 2 months before he left, he probably was, there working hard in the field.
Yeah, yeah.
2 months later, he's
Yeah.
in the UK.
Yeah.
That's
So
that
that shift
shifted
is
a needle
massive.
hugely.
Yeah, yeah.
So that shift has given a lot of currency to the elders to say that their way was right.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. I think that there's a lot of reasons why people came here. The World War II, the loss of labor,
Yeah.
wanting to fill those labor positions meant that, there weren't enough workers, and they thought, well, actually, let's get the migrants in.
So
and get them to work.
fundamentally, in terms of the actual context of it, what I'm fundamentally saying philosophically is that the progression, moving the needle, was massive in the last couple of generations. But now that the world's come to an easier place for most people, where you're living comfortably.
Do you know why it's different?
Go on.
Because when was it your grandfather?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, when your grandfather came, he came from survival.
yeah,
Do you understand?
yeah, yeah. No, he came from no. So
What I'm saying is he came here.
Yeah.
So whatever decision it was, whatever the mechanics that led him to come here,
Yeah.
he all of a sudden realized, hang on a second, I'm going to have to work very hard.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to, and then communities gathered together. So all the migrants gathered together.
Because it was a common vision.
Right? Because they were all trying to stabilize, because unfortunately, this country didn't really welcome us. The racism, the lack of regard in healthcare, social healthcare, housing, all of this was such that they turned to each other. So they were borrowing money, not from banks, they were borrowing money from each other. But now the generation below that, and certainly the generation below that, they don't have the concept of I'm surviving as a collective. Their survival is individual. So the lie being told is when you're experiencing something, it's a me issue.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
100%.
the solution is become a self-made person. That I made myself, as opposed to realizing, hang on a second, there's a lot of players involved in this.
No, so just to cut you off there, so I get what you're saying there, but what I'm saying is a bit different. So when you say survival, but then I'm saying the generation above me and the one below my grandfather. So
My generation,
yeah, your generation was an aspect of survival to advancement.
Yes.
Yeah, so progression.
Yeah,
Now
absolutely.
my generation, the progression is minimal.
I think you being so close to your generation, you're at the foothill of the mountain.
Okay.
Right? So you're seeing it from a different perspective. Me being someone who's from a generation before is able to look at your generation and see things slightly different from a different angle. And what I can see is that there's different advancements being happening here.
Okay.
And so what I would say is that if I look at my generation, I would have a different perspective, because it's easy for us to generalize about generations. And I think that there's a lot of differences to that. Yes, of course, there are certain complete outliers, and there are certain groupthink that happens.
Yeah.
But my generation definitely were navigating, who am I, and where do I belong? My parents' generation were like, we belong here, Baradri, family, this is where we belong. This concept of self was not even a concept.
Yeah.
To the point where they didn't really see the need of the individual. Now, the role of society is to protect the individual until the individual can protect himself.
Yeah.
What's happened is through, I believe, somebody coined the term migrational trauma or post-colonial trauma. So the whole, not getting into conspiracies, but the idea of just moving to another country that doesn't really accept you makes you think differently. Makes you think differently for a long time. That's just the definition of trauma. Something happens to you, you change your thinking in a negative way forever or for a long time. That has shaped the way people are now seeing things. I think your generation, which is my children's generation, have a different experience. And the key for your generation is this: understand this notion of doing it on your own. You can't do it on your own.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
My parents' generation were like, we've got to do everything together and it's got to be homogenous. The reality actually is this, that what we've got to do is celebrate each individual for who they are, but collectively protect it. Now that's the evolution, because if we do not protect the individual will not protect the collective. And that's the key. And the individual has their own expression. Hence why with Manshids, the very first program that we run is about understanding your authenticity. If you understand your authenticity, you automatically understand the authenticity of others. And hence why you don't want people to be like you.
Yeah.
You don't want to be like anybody else. But you're like, let me understand the world through your lens, as opposed to let me try to convince you that you are wrong or you're right. This notion of right and wrong is just nonsense.
But don't you think it's about having an open-ended argument to life?
What does that mean?
So an open-ended vision, essentially. So when you say your traumas or whatever's happened to you, so obviously you can't change your history or your lineage or your family's lineage or whatever it is, or the trauma that's happened colonially or whatever's happened before. You can't change. Well, you can change the here and now, or what your own environment is like. So
you can only change the here and now if you understand what happened to you, as opposed to being defined by it. The problem is there's some groups that say, oh, this happened to me and now the whole world must change for me. That's the problem. As opposed to, this what happened to me, this is what I now want to do with it. And can I get some help? Do you see?
So that's what I'm getting at. I agree with you. But I get it completely. So when I say an open-ended vision, so when you're saying, when you met people that are 40 to 50 years old or whatever, and they're thinking, oh, it's over, because what they thought what their potential was when they're younger is not who they are now. Or similarly, when the top of the mountain syndrome.
You know what I say to men? I show them a picture of I say to the man, like, what's been your biggest dream that you've wanted, but you haven't achieved it? And they tell me something that I wish I was X, Y, and Z. When did you first utter this dream or think of this dream? And they'll say, when I was 11 years old. So then I say to them, okay. And I show them a picture of an 11-year-old and I say, would you listen to this 11-year-old for life advice as a 53-year-old? And they'll be like, probably not. Would you listen to this? Would you go to him about where you should pin your goals? Probably not. So I said, if you wouldn't listen to an 11-year-old, why you listen to the 11-year-old that you were? It's time to restart again and have hope from today by dreaming big from today without any memory. Because remember what I said before, people are remembering, not living. So if you can live from now, get back to the present moment where you surrender to God, then you're in a better position to say, okay, where am I? Where shall I go? And what's my next step?
What if they say that the next step is that same goal they said when they're 11?
That's fine. If that's genuinely theirs, because that's also okay. Nothing beats, achieving a dream that you had as an 11-year-old, but most people are crippled by it because they've been carrying that weight for a long time. So in that case, it only helps if you shift the way you see it. It's like, is that something I really intrinsically want? Or was that something I just kept telling myself and typically hurting myself by not being anywhere near achieving it?
But so don't you think that by peeling it back and just doing the bare basics, that you're halfway there?
When you say bare basics, what do you
So
mean?
okay, so for example, like so the pizza shop behind me here,
Yeah.
I've explained it on a podcast before, but that was my first kind of big challenge, or the big test in life kind of thing. I was balancing my A level doing it, and while I was in the pizza shop, I learned a lot about hard graft, hard work, this that.
Yeah.
I've been working since I was 14, but in terms of like really burning in like 300-degree heat, doing the diner, the pizza ovens, and all of that. So when it kind of finished and I was kind of done with it, I kind of went through a moment where like, what's next? Because I spent all my energy in this one thing and I was kind of burnt out for a bit, and then coronavirus happened and a few other things happened. So when you get hit with these troubles, it defines you as a man. Like when they say you're made of your weaknesses rather than your strengths, and how you react to them. So when I say tip it back to the bare basics, so number one is do a to-do list in the morning of what you actually got to do for the day, and then see them as accomplishments. Rather than what you're saying when they start overthinking, it's natural to overthink and say and they get bombarded by.
Most people are living the same day every single day,
exactly.
as opposed to meeting
but
it
if
as
you
a new
celebrate the little wins and then turn them into even bigger wins, and then say, look, what's the goal for the end of the week, and then say what got to do day by day to get there.
Yeah.
Because it's not always one big massive problem, it's always a set of small little problems. So by doing them day by day, you're halfway there, and then when you realize that the light at the end of the tunnel, then your own humanistic traits come back in, your ambition comes back in, and your drive and that kick in your step comes back in, and then you start trying to work harder.
I think that you having your father in your life was a huge factor.
100%.
And unfortunately, some people don't.
No.
And when some people don't, it was the role of the community to be the father of the child. And in some cases, when that's not the case, then what happens is the child then becomes locked into certain ways of just understanding and seeing the world.
But don't you think it's 50-50?
What?
So the community and then the person themselves.
So I think the person can only be helped when they help themselves. Yes, in some cases you can help people who aren't helping themselves,
No,
but usually they'll go back to the way. So if somebody, for example, is addicted to certain drugs or whatever it might be, or even they may be addicted to the gym, they're living in the gym all the time, right? That's still a problem. Even though they're getting hench, right? It's still a problem. So if that person is addicted, they can only help themselves, or they can only be helped when they first start to help themselves in conjunction with others helping them by helping them with the environment and things. So I'm not so sure 50-50 is the right terminology.
No, so
because sometimes sometimes it may mean that you take 90% because it's like, I can sort this myself, but I need that 10%.
When I say 50-50, I mean it's a generalization.
Okay, definitely.
Case by case is different.
It's a mutual thing. You can't do it alone,
Yeah.
and you shouldn't rely on the community, because some people, and this is unfortunately what I find, is most men are in two extremes. They're either trying to do it all alone, or they're waiting for someone to come and save them. And so if you can shift them from this binary thinking of this is the way or this is the way, because when men try to do everything alone, they eventually crash. When they crash, they become passive. When they become passive, the whole weight comes on them, and they can't see, and they are with hazy lens, and their vision basically blurs because they're feeling the weight of wanting to do it all themselves, and they think, leave it. And hence why there's tons of research done that when a father divorces, when a man divorces his wife, many men go through this issue of, nobody's going to help me become a good father to my kids. And so they try, and then when it's so hard because maybe it wasn't a good divorce, maybe the ex-wife isn't helping you, which is wrong, because regardless of what kind of partner you were,
the kids are more important.
The kids, you're still a co-parent to the kid. So it's understanding that you've got to fight through all of that yourself. And if you had community, if you had grandparents saying to both of you, listen, you guys didn't want to work out together, you damn well make sure that you're there for your kids. And, don't ever turn each other, your kids against each other kind of thing. But we don't have that messaging. And so a lot of people are carrying essentially they oscillate. They either go to the extreme of thinking, I've got to do it all me. And some people make it. Or I can't do anything on my own. And that's where I think a good chunk of people sit. And some people go to between both. They oscillate between both.
So I think we'll have to do a part 2 of the podcast, because I've only got, so I think to kind of end it is that dynamic of when a father has gone through a divorce, or a mother, how do you kind of bridge the gap and do it for the children? A
lot of patience, man. Heck of a lot of patience. The 5th program that we didn't speak about actually is a program for boys. And it's a rites of passage program. And it's about helping fathers with their sons, mothers with their sons when fathers are absent. You know, when I became divorced with the mother of my kids, and I've lived a colorful life because I got divorced again.
Okay.
So it's been an interesting dynamic for me to learn from all of these, you know,
tribulation.
yeah, I mean, some of the stuff was my fault. Some of the stuff was like something you just carry from how things are. And then you realize, hang on a second, if I'm really going to sort my life out, I need to first look in the mirror and look long and hard enough to get rid of the stuff I don't like, and long and hard enough to realize I'm okay as I am.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can begin to change things. So I think when it comes to a father who's going through a divorce or has gone through divorce and is trying to get back in touch with his kids or trying to navigate that, come to our program. Honestly, it's going to help you, the fatherhood program, because it's designed to help with that. But fundamentally, there's a few things. You've got to be very patient. You can't take anything personally. Don't ever have a conversation with your ex over text. If you can, ideally on the phone. If you can, ideally even, you know, in person. Never, ever, ever belittle the mother of your children in front of them. Even insinuate in any shape or form, because you're questioning their loyalty. And agree if you can with her and say, look, please don't talk ill of me to the kids in any shape or form, because kids don't know how to juggle loyalty.
Yeah.
But that's perhaps something for another conversation.
Yeah, I think we're gonna hit the time limit on this podcast, but I think inshallah we'll get you back on and then we'll explore it a bit further. Yeah, but
Pleasure having you, bro.
Conversation, bro. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.